3, 2. I don't know why I started that. Man, it's been a while.
Been a minute.
Welcome to Backseat Directing.
We talk about... It has been a while.
Welcome to Backseat Directing.
We talk about movies, TV shows, comics, and more.
We're your hosts,
Andrew
and Aaron.
And we film new episodes and air them every Monday and Thursday.
Today we are going over the movie Avatar: The Way of Water.
3, 2, 1, action. You like how I caught that? As we put out the episodes on Monday and Thursday.
Yeah, we film them whenever, it seems. Man, I think for the last, 5 episodes that we've recorded, while I'm editing them, we say, we're going to get this intro someday.
I know,
we butcher it.
We've really biffed it the last 5.
It's ever since we've added in the part where we say that we release the episodes every Monday and Thursday. Because before we were in a groove. And now for whatever reason, that one line.
You can't change one small thing. But no. I'm really excited today to talk about Way of the Water. Because I've never been one of those people, I feel like that was a huge fan of the first Avatar. I think maybe partly to do with the age that I watched it, and I wasn't really into the hype of it when it very first came out. But I rewatched it recently to prepare for knowing that we were going to do this episode and watch the new movie, and it's like a whole spectacle. It's a very cool world to enter, but I'm really excited that we're going to be able to talk about it. And we just watched this together an hour ago.
Yeah, the new one that came out, The Way of Water. I watched Avatar probably 2 months ago, the first one, so it's kind of fresh in my mind too. But yeah, it's good. I remember when it came out, it was a huge deal. It was what everyone was talking about, at school and stuff. Have you seen Avatar yet? Have you seen Avatar yet?
Yeah, Avatar's had a couple of resurgences because it topped the highest selling box office number of all time, and then it was overtaken by, I believe, Avengers Endgame. Mm-hmm. But it's had a resurgence to the number one. From then, it's back to number one because it's had multiple theater runs.
I think it got released 4 months ago or something, 5 months ago, maybe a little bit longer, and it made $100 million or something.
Which is insane.
On a
with new movies coming out.
Yeah, yeah. That's wild, isn't it?
I watched it when
Some movies are struggling to make that much money in general, Black Adam is the first one that comes to mind that maybe made less than what they were hoping for.
And this is a 13-year-old movie that can come back into theaters and do that.
That people have seen.
Yeah, and when I just rewatched it recently, I watched it when it came back onto Disney Plus. So if any of our listeners aren't aware, you can go watch the first movie on Disney Plus. I think it's...
Use promo code Backseat Directing.
Which doesn't exist. I think that it's a very fun idea to watch the first movie right before, because I got a lot out of watching it before going to see Way of the Water. They start off really getting into the story at the beginning of Way of the Water, and I don't feel like they really hold your hand. They expect you to have seen and understand the first movie. They start off with talking about Grace and introducing new characters, and they don't explain who Grace is. Right. Luckily, we understand that.
The world building is very complex throughout the first movie, and even more so in the second one. They just kind of build upon it. You're right. They don't really hold your hand and walk you through the first act of the movie. It's
I appreciate.
This is where we left off. This is where we're picking up. Here's a 5-minute recap of what's happened since then. And then we're going to jump forward a year and start the movie kind of thing.
I appreciated that speed because I had just watched the movie and I was almost expecting a recap at the beginning. So I'm glad that it took off. And I think that if you're going to watch a sequel, you should be expected to have watched the first film. And I think that they did a really good job with that. To try and help our listeners along, Aaron and myself, Aaron's going to do a synopsis, and I prepared some kind of terminology explanations to help set the scene and get into this world of Pandora. So Aaron's going to explain general concept of what happened. We are going to get deeper into spoiler territory as this goes along. So this is a fair warning to everyone listening. We're going to prepare you for the world, and then we're going to spoil the world.
Yes. So from this point on, if you haven't seen it, go watch it. Come back, watch the episode, because we're going to be talking about the story from this point on. So Jake Sully is the main character. He was the human who got transformed into the Na'vi form at the end of the first one. So he's now living with his new family on the moon Pandora. And then throughout the beginning part of the act, a familiar threat returns, and that person is the colonel that ended up dying in the first Avatar. And his name is
Colonel Miles Quaritch.
Quaritch. So he is reincarnated into the Na'vi form, but it's not him exactly, because he did die in the first one. But what they did was they made the body, and they put his memories up until that point into that body. So that new formed person does not know that how he died, kind of thing.
Yeah, this is where the beginning is expositional, which I'll talk about more. The first Avatar is very heavily expositional in its beginning as well.
Yeah. So the rest of the movie is basically his revenge on Jake Sully and his family. So Jake Sully and his family, they flee the tribe that they were staying with and go all the way across the planet and find a water tribe and end up staying there.
Yeah, so at this point, Jake his family's now expanded. The time period looks like it's maybe been
6 years?
10 years or so.
Yeah.
I'd say some of the kids are older, so
Yeah,
between 10 and 15 years.
Probably about the time that's
it's got
actually passed.
It's got to be 13
Since the
years.
movie
It's got to be
came out,
about
yeah.
exactly the
I guess
age
they are a little
of
older.
Spider.
Yeah.
So but Jake now has a family with 4 kids. His wife Natiri. They have 4 children named. Let's see if I can do them from oldest to youngest. So. And I'm forgetting the oldest son's name to start it off. But the youngest daughter, we'll go in reverse. Youngest is Tuk, and then Loak, and then which is their son, and then their daughter. And their daughter Kiri, and then the one that I'm forgetting, I have his name here, is Neteyam. Neteyam is the oldest son. Okay, so Tuk, the youngest daughter, Loak, the youngest son, Kiri, the oldest daughter, and Neteyam, the oldest son. And then, so that's our kind of new cast of characters. So the biggest thing about this movie is going to be the connection of family. So they arrive to the Metkaina, which is, like Aaron said, the reef people, and then it's just this like kind of a revenge story, basically, sums up to, of Quaritch trying to hunt them down by whatever means necessary.
Yeah, and there's a little bit more complexity that goes into their family dynamic too. So Curry, like you said, she's not actually their daughter.
Adopted daughter.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which they explain in the beginning. And then they have another kind of kid that's floating around the family too, Spider, who we end up later finding out is Quaritch's kid. So there's a lot of different dynamics going on in the family.
Yeah, I feel like the message of the movie overall is acceptance, and it's family and it's connectedness. Like the whole message of the first movie, we find out at the end that the planet of Pandora is basically one giant. It's like a giant brain. Like everything's connected. Everything has these synapses to one another. Yeah. The ecosystem can communicate with the other side of the planet. Basically, it all lives and breathes through Awa, which is their spirit goddess, and that's kind of like the same with this small unconventional family, the Sullys. You know, the Sullys have each other's back, so they even know that Spider may not be a biological part of their family. Kiri may not be a biological part of their family. I think the message is like acceptance and family throughout, which is really cool in this movie.
Especially with them going to the new water tribe area too.
They have to be accepted in a whole nother place.
Right.
Yeah, I think that, let me get into the terminology before we get too far into discussing anything else. So just so we can all keep our heads on with this whole world, because it's really like a epic fantasy novel. They create like an awesome world. James Cameron does such beautiful world building, and you have to catch on to these words or you could get lost quick. So Pandora obviously is the planet. I think that's the biggest one that most people will be familiar with. Na'vi,
music streaming service.
yeah. The Na'vi is both the people and the language spoken by the people on the planet. Ometakaya is the forest people, and the Ometakayan the Ometakaya is the clan, and then the Ometakayan is the people of the forest clan. And then the Metkaina is the reef people. The Ikran is the flying dragon, if you want to call them that they have the bond with. Shahilu is the bond that they form with their braid with the different animals. Taruk Makto is what they keep referring to Jake as in the beginning of the film. It means the rider of the last shadow. So referencing the events of the first Avatar, he tamed that gigantic Ikran and basically united all the tribes that way, because there's a myth of the few people who can achieve that feat. So everyone rallied behind him because he is Turuk Makto. And then unobtainium is the precious metal from the first movie that the people of the Ometakaya are situated upon. It's basically the reason for all the strife in the first Avatar is trying to get access to that metal and driving out the native population in the process. Ewa, like I already said, is the spirit goddess. She means everything to them. She's their religion, their god, their deity. And then the sky people is what they refer to for humans. And the very big plot point of this movie, the final terminology piece that I have, is the Tulkun, which is the whale, I guess you could say, in this movie, the large species of whale that young Loak forms a bond with one of them. And when you watch this movie, they have like a deeply religious experience, and they have a deeply spiritual connection with these animals, and they're a huge part of the plot.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in. It's kind of fun though, because like a lot of these other franchises that we're familiar with and follow a lot started way before we were born. And this is one that's like being developed in the peak of our like upbringing. You know, and like it has been a long time since the first one came out. That one came out in 2009. So over a decade later, we get the second one. So it's cool that we're like kind of learning the world as it's being created now, you know, opposed to like Star Wars or even like the Marvel stuff. That stuff's been out for a long time, and it's very like well understood. Yeah. And this isn't yet.
A cool thing that Avatar Way of the Water and the first one even too do a lot, which I think helps with the world building and helps with the realism, is a lot of times when they're talking about things or introducing something, they just introduce it into conversation, and then you kind of catch up as a viewer as you go along. Like like in the real world, they'll give something multiple different names. Like they'll call humans sky people, or they'll call them humans, or they call like these different, or the Na'vi, the Ometakaya. You can be Na'vi, Ometakaya, like you can be both of those things. So they'll use them interchangeably, and it can be confusing, but it also is just the way that we talk in real life, and having the way they just enter it into conversation, I think makes it feel real.
The world building is crazy.
It's really pretty flawless. Yeah. I mean, I think there's overly expositional at points. I felt it a lot more in the first movie, especially with the introduction of the unobtainium. Mm-hmm. At one point, Giovanni Ribisi's character, who's like the big head honcho CEO, he takes the rock and he goes, "This is unobtainium. This is what we're after." And I was like, well, that's about as expositional as it gets. Like,
it's not a bad thing though. I kind of like it. It's easier to follow.
It is easier to follow,
especially when there's a bunch of things with different names that I've never heard of before. It's hard for me to keep up with everything. That's why you're saying all the names, and I'm learning and listening from you.
I think that is I think that it can be necessary. Like in a movie of this scale, with, like I said, there's so many things they're introducing on the fly.
Because they kind of stayed away from that in the second one, where there was an important fluid that they were extracting from that whale species, and they like brushed over that thing so fast.
Yeah. Something I think potentially...
This is worth $80 million? All right, you're not going to see it again.
I think they're leaning into the water aspect for the future films, and I think that was just our introduction to that. I think it'll be a much bigger part of the plot. So yeah, I think that's almost like an Easter egg for the future films with the way they brushed over it.
Yeah, so overall, what'd you think?
Overall, I think this movie is freaking phenomenal. I think it's so cool. Like, I think this must be what it felt like to go see the first one in theaters. And I think they had an impossible task of capturing the magic that they put on screen the first time. And I think they did it in a lot of ways by, they flipped the script on us. They introduced the kids. There's 4 new kids in the family, and then there's 3 kids that are from the Metkaina. And it kind of feels like a little bit of an injection of like Goonies in there, where we're following the adventures of these kids now, and that kind of changes the nature of the story. And then they also change the setting by having them fly over to the Metkayina, to the reef people. And so we have a whole new world. It feels like we're being introduced to Pandora again for the very first time. So I feel like I got swept up in that spirit of that everyone felt the first time we watched Avatar, which, like I said, must have been such a hard thing for them to envision, is how are we going to make people feel this way again when they've already met Pandora? So I think they captured it so well. I felt like I was in an amusement ride. Like I felt like I've been on Flight of Passage at Disney. It's my favorite ride at Disney. And I felt like I was on Flight of Passage again this whole movie. Like it felt like magic. It did feel long, and yeah, I've got critiques for it, and you're going to hear them. But it was phenomenal. What did you think of it?
I agree with everything you said. The world building, the way everything looked, the characters, the story, very well thought out, and somehow they stayed at the same level of the first one, if not better.
I agree.
You know, like they definitely upped it in some aspects, and then I would say we're on the same level of some aspects. I think maybe there's a few things that I have questions about. Maybe they'll be answered in the next 3 movies that they have planned out for this. So yeah, I somehow they did it.
Yeah.
You know, like they did it. It's the most successful movie ever. You know, so there's a lot of eyes on this movie, and a lot of people that are probably going to try to find ways to make it, to not like it, you know, and
believe me, when I watch a movie, I try to find ways to not like it.
Yeah.
I that's not the best way to say it, but I look to nitpick.
Especially now that we're doing this podcast too, I watch movies in a different light than what I used to. I watch it like thinking of like, oh, what did I think about that? Rather than just like feeling it sometimes. But while I was watching this movie, I was just kind of surrounded by the world.
Yeah.
You know, like I wasn't overly like, oh, they should have done this, or like, look at that lighting setup, or like, you know, like I wasn't overly thinking about that during this movie. Like it just kind of encapsulated me into the world, you know? I
would say I felt a feeling of wonder, and I felt the feeling of being drawn into the world, similar to the way I feel when I watch Jurassic Park or Harry Potter. And I think those movies are the highest caliber to me of like feeling that feeling of wonder. Like Jurassic Park, when you first see the brachiosaurs like roaming across the plains, is like, that's a jaw-dropping moment. And this movie captures that feeling really well. James Cameron, who is the director, and we'll talk about the creators of the film. We're just getting really swept up because we're excited, but James Cameron likes to film in 3D, which is somewhat of like a lost art already, because of the fact that he feels like we see in 3D. He's like basically every animal and even insects on Earth have at least 2 eyes. So we see in 3 dimensions. So he thinks that if you film in that is the best way to draw you into the world and make you feel as if it's real. And that's the goal of a movie in a lot of ways, right? Is to make you feel as if you're there.
With that being said, we watched it in 2D.
Yes.
Because we are cheap.
But it's still filmed with 3D cameras, which changes the way that it looks.
Let's kind of get into a little bit of the statistics first. We've kind of been jumped right into talking about the movie and stuff, which normally we kind of break this down a little bit earlier in the episode, which just goes to show like how much we actually did enjoy it. But yeah, this movie is rated PG-13. It's 3 hours and 12 minutes long. So we were in there for a long time. Before
you go further, speaking of PG-13, did you catch the one F word in the movie?
Of course I did.
I think they put it at a good moment.
Yeah,
it's like an impactful moment. Because when I watch a PG-13 movie, which if you don't already know this, the NPAA that rates movies gives you one use of the F word because it's considered severe enough. And I'm always interested in where they choose to put it. Like Wolverine will usually say it once.
Right.
And in this movie, when they said it, I was like,
bud.
Yeah. But it gives you a feel for what they felt like was an important moment in the movie because they chose to use their one coin they had. And I felt like when Spider was...
That moment could have like a big implication of events for the next few movies.
Next 3 movies, yeah.
So the part that we're talking about, let's just go ahead and talk about it. You know, that way someone maybe didn't catch the F word. At the end, that ship that they're on is sinking, and it's right after Sully and the Colonel were fighting, Kortrich, and they got separated, and they're both basically drowning. So the kids all split up to go look for them, and Spider found his his dad. And he's like swimming away. He stops for a moment. Am I going to save him? He's kind of contemplating what he should do. And then he's like, F it. And turns around and starts swimming towards him to rescue him, which is basically the whole reason why anything bad in this movie happened.
It's because Quaritch is alive.
Right.
That, like you said, has huge implications for the rest of the movies of him living. So I think that was an interesting moment.
Yeah. IMDb has it at 8.2 out of 10. The budget for this film is a lot. $350 million is the estimated number for this film. In comparison to the first Avatar from 2009, $237 million. So that's still a lot of money. And they over $100 million more. Right now, the box office, and again, I don't know how accurate this is, but this is on IMDb as of right now, which is Saturday morning. So it's only been out for like 3 days. It's brought in $103.4 million.
Not even a full 3 days. This closing Saturday will be a big difference, I think, from the start of Saturday.
Yeah, that number is very high. And then just to refresh everyone's memory, the first one brought in $2.9 billion.
Good Lord. Yeah, and I think that's with 2 or if not 3 theater runs, but very, very impressive that it still has that draw on multiple appearances in theaters.
It's also crazy too that it's like the first movie in something. You know, like I feel like a lot of times there's more interest in like the second one.
Well, Fast and the Furious 7, I think, is the most profitable. It took them 7 movies to make that.
Right. Yeah. So it's crazy that it's the first one of this kind of franchise that brought in literally the most money that any movie has ever done.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot more to do with how successful it is than just the simple fact of how good it is. So we'll see if it can outperform, if Avatar 2 can outperform Avatar 1. But, you know, we've had a global pandemic. We have hard economic times. Maybe it doesn't, but I think that we might still consider it better looking back, a even better movie than the original.
Yeah. Andrew, who is in this movie? Who are the creators, the actors?
Actually, nobody.
Nobody?
This movie made itself.
Wow.
So
it's all AI, guys. It's all AI.
So the director of this movie is James Cameron, and he's also the writer. He wrote the original Avatar by himself. He wrote this one with a team. James Cameron, also known for directing Aliens, Terminator 1 and Terminator 2, the 2 best Terminator movies, and Titanic, famously, and also a movie I'm going to talk about later, which is The Abyss. There's a bunch of other movies I could mention, but he is a huge name in Hollywood, one of the highest, greatest directors of all time. You know, he knows and is friends with all these other guys like Spielberg, and obviously has made some of the most financially successful movies to ever touch the screen.
Yeah, Titanic being at 3rd highest, I believe.
So the 1st and 3rd highest. He knows what the people want to see.
Yeah.
Now, cinematography was done by Mauro Fiore, who also did cinematography for Southpaw, The Equalizer, Real Steel, A-Team, Training Day, Spider-Man No Way Home, among a bunch of others. But as a DP, it doesn't get much more high quality action than that, capturing these scenes. And there's a lot of work to be done with James Cameron on these films. James Cameron, I've seen behind the scenes pictures of him holding the camera, and he says that in certain films he's done, all the handheld shots are even done by him, where he's very involved with the camera work. So Mauro Fiore and Cameron, I'm sure, work closely together. James Horner did the score, who's also known for Titanic, Braveheart, and The Amazing Spider-Man. Just a few of the most iconic scores of all time, and then obviously also touching on Spider-Man. So let's look at the cast, because this movie has a huge cast, but I'm going to kind of narrow it down a little bit so you don't have to listen to me say names forever. Let's see. Sam Worthington is our star, Jake Sully. Zoe Saldana is Neytiri, his wife. Sigourney Weaver in the first movie is Dr. Grace Augustine, but in this movie she voices Kiri, who is born from the avatar of Grace. Stephen Lang is both Colonel Miles Quaritch and the revived avatar of Colonel Quaritch. Let's see. Giovanni Ribisi is in the first film, as I mentioned, as Parker Selfridge. Joel David Moore is in both films as Norm Spellman, who's a scientist who also has an avatar. He remained on Pandora with the family. Jamie, let's get into the children. So Jamie Flatters is Nataeum, Brittane Dalton is Loak, Trinity Jolie Bliss is Took, Jack Champion is Spider, Bailey Bass is Sireya, Kate Winslet is Renal, and Cliff Curtis as Tonewari, which those last three are respectively the parents who are the spiritual and spiritual leader and the male leader. Which would you call him? The war leader or the chief, the two leaders of the Metkaina, and then their daughter Sireya. So this cast is really amazing.
For sure.
it's I could go on and on. There's a lot more individuals. This film is an epic. It's huge.
Yes.
Between the two taking place over decades, over a decade of time in their world and over a decade of time in our world too. So there's a lot of actors in these two movies, but like I said, I don't want to go on and on with their names. Who do you feel like was your favorite portrayal, favorite character?
My favorite character is Jake. I just think he's really cool.
I always have a hard time with the scenes with a character like that where I wish they would soften up on their kids.
Yeah.
I want them to be just tell them you love them. Just sneak that in there.
But he did at the end, and it was he got me. When he was like,
I feel like he didn't get to say it to Nataeum.
He didn't.
He was always like, you're supposed to look out for your brother.
Yeah. I think Kitty.
Yeah, Kiri.
She I liked her character a lot too. And there's a lot of mystery around her, and I think that's intriguing.
That's, I think, a lot of setup for the future, because she has some kind of deep connection with Awa. Yeah. That I think they're definitely going to build upon.
We don't know who her father is.
My theory is that she is born strictly between the planet and the avatar of Grace. Yeah. I think that her parent is Awa, and that's why she has this connection to the Earth.
Yeah. I'm interested to see the development of her character a lot.
They gave us a little tease that it might be Norm with that little camera footage,
yeah.
But
I think that's the obvious choice, and I think that's why they teased it.
I still think it's my play.
Thank you everyone for listening. For those of you that have stayed this long, we appreciate it, and it would help us out a lot if you go over to Spotify and give us a 5-star rating. You can give us a 1-star rating too, but we'll just delete it. So.
Yeah, follow and rate on Spotify. Give us your true opinion so that we can help improve the show. We thank you guys very much for listening on any platform.
All right, Andrew, let's kind of go into our favorite parts of the story, maybe some of the questions that we have about kind of the continuity of things, and then going into your backseat directing stuff.
Okay. So I thought that the story was actually really compelling. So the first Avatar, we have a love story. Basically, star-crossed lovers, Romeo and Juliet in space. Not something we haven't seen before, even though it's in space. It's basically a love story between Jake Sully and Neytiri. And in this movie, we kind of got this action-adventure story with a group of kids kind of getting connected to the culture again, meeting the Metkaina, which is the experience. We got to be the surrogate audience through Jake Sully in the first movie. Now we're kind of the surrogate audience through the whole Sully family in this movie, because they're learning a whole new world and culture. And I enjoyed that approach greatly. I loved it. One thing that I have a few nitpicks with the story that I could go through. But I kind of want to touch on things as we go along with my nitpicks, and then I have big complaints, or a big complaint or two in my backseat directing segment. So moving along with the plot, they leave the Omaticaya people in the forest, a group of people that critical to the initial film, and they leave them in a way to protect them and for Jake to protect his family. So that's a key hallmark of the story, right? Is Jake Sully saying, if we have to run, we have to run. I have to protect my family at all costs. I have to do what I can. Sully, stick together. Family is the most important thing. And I think that you can see them building up throughout the whole story. It's kind of like having this family now has built this fear in Jake Sully that he didn't have in the first movie, where he's afraid to fight. He's afraid to lose everything he has because he loves the life that he's built.
He lost everything he had.
Sorry?
In the first one, he lost everything he had. He's now in a different body, and things are completely different. That's like very traumatic. Like the family members of his now tribe, who is his wife's tribe, they died. Like it was very traumatic. So I understand his like.
He's also lost his brother, which is an unspoken kind of elephant in the room, I feel like, for him always, because that's probably ties into his fear of losing family.
Yeah. So I understand kind of where he's coming from, that he wants to kind of protect that, but maybe in a more responsible way, I guess you could say.
Ironically, as opposed to most movies, this movie is not promoting really pacifism. It's promoting standing up to defend and fight for what you believe in. At least that's the way that I took the message of throughout the entire movie. Jake is on the back pedal. He's running away from his home that he loved and the people he cares about. And he's running because he believes it's the most likely, safest way to keep his family safe and to keep his people safe. And Neytiri's fighting against him pretty much tooth and nail. She disagrees with him at every turn, but she goes along because she also cares deeply about their family. And if he, as the leading patriarch of the family, thinks it's the best thing to do, she goes along with it. But I think that the filmmakers and the story of the movie wants us to side with Neytiri, because ultimately at the end of the movie, this is the journey that I saw going along. About halfway through the movie, I was like, I hope they go the route that I'm seeing, which is that Jake learning the lesson that he needs at some point, he can't keep running, and that his family, like he says at the end, it's his greatest weakness and his greatest strength. Because although he is afraid to lose his family, that doesn't necessarily always mean running away. And I think that's the lesson learned at the end of the movie. That's one of my small nitpicks, is the narration at the end of the movie. He says that point blank. He says that it's our greatest weakness and our greatest strength, and I've learned that I need to fight to protect my family. I felt like they showed that. They showed that beautifully throughout the film. And there's a moment at the end of the movie, which I'm going all over the place now, but let's just talk about what we like about it. At the end of the movie, where Quaritch baits him and says, are you going to leave too, Jake? Because you're going to go out there knowing that I will always be hunting your family. I will never give up, and I will kill your family. And he says, all right, let's do it then. And he dives back into the fight, because that's the moment where I feel like he took the offensive and took the fight, and he's going to do. I feel like they built up to showing that, and they showed it. I didn't feel like it was necessary to be said. I felt like that was a little bit of hand-holding. Whereas a lot of people oftentimes will complain that narration is a crutch in a story. I actually really like narration, usually when I feel like it's done correctly. But I feel like in this movie, they specifically clearly used it as a crutch, because they used it at the beginning for exposition, and then they used it at the end to explain the journey of the character, and it was not used throughout. Whereas in the first movie, it was a story tool throughout, because they had the idea of him doing these video journals where he could always be talking directly to the camera. And they played that off really well in the first movie. They didn't have that here. So it felt like a crutch, not having it as a story element, only at the very beginning and very end.
Yeah, they made it seem less of like a narration in the first one and more of like it's serving a purpose. He's documenting his experiences. In this one, he's like just straight out narrating the story.
Yeah. He's like, this is for you, audience of the film.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which I don't think is a bad thing necessarily. I think it's smoother in the first one when he had like a purpose to be a narrator, I think in the beginning maybe it was necessary because it's been 13 years and a lot has happened, and it's just kind of like, hey, catch up, now the movie's gonna start, and I think maybe at the end, I don't know if it was a crutch, because like you said, they told the story really well. It was just kind of like tying the knot, like it's done, like this is the end.
But I think the key mark of writing or depicting a story on film or a painting is showing it and not telling it. I think that's when you know your work's been done really well. If an actor can show you that they're distraught and they don't have to say, I'm really upset right now, then they've done their job. And I think they did that job. So I think it was unnecessary to have that voiceover, which, like I said, I usually like a narration. People complain about it as a crutch in Blade Runner, and the original Blade Runner, and I like a good voiceover. I really like Sam Worthington's voice. I'm really glad he ended up being cast in this role because I think his voice sounds really good, especially as the narration when it's like the main focus of the, where you're just hearing it feels very strong. So, but I just did not approve of that additional line. It just seemed like, oh, well, I was like, because you feel like as you're watching a movie, you really should be kind of deciphering it, whether you know you are or not. And I feel like it's kind of like takes away from the prize of having discerned that theme if they're just like, let me spell it out for you.
Yeah, I definitely see where you're coming from. And
it's a nitpick, though. This is one of my nitpicks. It's not, I don't think it's anything that affects my thoughts on the film, really.
Yeah. What else you got?
Oh, this you're going to have to explain to me, brother. At the end of the movie, so I'd say the last hour of the movie starts with a fight where they're charging Quaritch's people. Maybe it's not a full hour, but the whole third act of the movie is this big battle between the Metkayina and the humans. Where did the Metkayina go? At a certain point, it's just the Sullys, and they are gone, nowhere to be seen. And it's like, hey guys, people are trapped inside this ship. Like, where are all the people that are like experts at breathing underwater for their whole lives?
Right.
And they are gone. I was wondering where they were the whole last 30 minutes of the movie.
Yeah, I was wondering where they were when they were like fighting, and it was like just the family.
They showed them for some of the fighting. They showed them when there was like a lot of soldiers, but
I guess they didn't die, right? Because we saw them in the end, right?
We know Renal and Toniwari didn't die because they're definitely at the end. And I don't think all the rest of the Metkayina died.
I don't know.
They were just gone question. And they needed a lot of help. That's a nitpick. But the story wanted to focus on them, so they went that direction. And they're just like, maybe the audience won't think about it. But I thought about it the whole time. maybe I'm the only one. Maybe a lot of other people did too. But I think it'll be something people notice. And then my other nitpick is when Jake, like I said, goes back into that fight with Quaritch, the family goes to swim away and this fire erupts. And they're like, oh, hurry back onto the ship. Why not swim down?
Under the water?
The fire is not going underneath the water.
I was thinking the same thing.
Because that leads to so much strife for the rest of the film that they're all trapped on the ship.
The top, and the flames aren't under the water.
Exactly.
Yeah, I thought the same exact thing.
They were deep enough to swim.
Just keep going.
Yeah.
Like, maybe they thought it was going to explode or something. I don't know.
I just don't know why they would go back onto the ship, because that's where the rest of the problems in the film come from. Is at the end of the movie is everyone's trapped on the ship and they're drowning.
Right.
And that is caused by this little fire on the surface of the water.
It was a big fire, but I get your point.
It is a big fire, but
I thought the exact same thing.
Ocean.
I was like, boom, it exploded. Okay, they're going to dive under it. They can hold their breath for 20 minutes.
I thought for sure that they were immediately going to do that.
I thought the same thing in that part. So I have a little nitpick or a question maybe. Why was it turned into a revenge story? Why did he have so many people going along with? Is it just because he was the boss?
That's a good one.
They were chasing after Jake Sully. Jake Sully left, right? Because from the first film, they were after that rock, which is called
Unobtainium.
Unobtainium, yep. They were after that, and then he died. He got rebirthed into the Avatar, the Na'vi state, and now he just wants revenge. And everyone else in this army is like, all right, yeah, let's go get your revenge. We don't need that rock anymore. We're not going to continue to attack the natives that we were already attacking. We're Jake Sully. He's the one who causes all of our problems. And yeah, he was setting up blockades and stuff on the railroads and stuff. But what happened when he left? Did they still do that? And if they did,
he wasn't remotely communicating with them from the Metkayina, so they should have just gone after continued looking in the Hallelujah Mountains.
Wouldn't it have hurt Jake Sully more? Maybe I'm just really morbid, but to just attack his old clan?
Yeah, I think so, for sure.
Because eventually that's what they did, right? They went and shot the whale or whatever, and then Jake Sully came out.
And what happened to
why wouldn't they have just done that with the original tribe? What's Zoe
Saldana? Her character's Neytiri.
Neytiri? Neytiri would have pulled Jake Sully back over there to save her family, her extended family.
What happened?
If they attacked the original people that they were after.
I am kind of confused on it, and maybe I missed something.
Why chase them all over Pandora?
Maybe I missed something in the exposition where they're walking around with Quaritch and the new general and showing all those spider bots. But what happened to the unobtainium? Were they still going after because the biggest deposit of it was supposed to be where like Home Tree and the Spirit Tree and all these where the Omaticaya people were. Wouldn't they still be going after that instead of chasing him across the ocean?
How did the first Avatar end? Like you just watched it. I watched it a little while ago, so I don't remember like the exact ending. Were they were still in that spot, right? Where all that rock was?
So they had to leave Home Tree, but they made a temporary home over by the Spirit Tree, which is what the humans, the sky people, were coming to destroy when they had their big final battle, and then they sent all of the humans off world when they won, because Pandora basically Awa helped them. All the animals of Pandora were coming to their aid, which is how they won. And I just don't understand. It's all still there. The unobtainium would all still be there for the taking.
They didn't harvest it all.
I guess I know they're shifting to this other resource on the planet, but it didn't seem like the greater military effort had that plan in mind. It was just this.
We gotta get Jake Sully.
Yeah, it was like this branch of the naval branch of them basically going after this, you know. Yeah. So I didn't understand that shift, and Quaritch was so solely based on going after Jake Sully to get revenge for his own death. That was kind of a fluctuating thing for me too, where he said to Spider, he's like, "That wasn't me. That's a different person." But then he also has this deep connection to him, and later in the movie calls it himself.
Yeah, I think he was totally lying to Spider at that spot.
Maybe that's the difference.
To try to get Spider to go along with him,
I thought it was going to go the route of him having no respect for the other version of himself. When he crushed the skull, I felt like that was him saying like, "You were weak, like you were killed by Neytiri and Jake. Like that wouldn't happen to me." Like that's how I saw it. But he still seemed like he had this revenge plotline set his heart just on Jake Sully. Which is so weird that he was so staunchly set on. I guess he felt betrayed by him because he was one of his people, but Neytiri killed him.
I guess it's fine that Jake didn't even kill him. But I mean, Jake was the reason for his downfall, right? Yeah. Sabotaging his.
He also knew Jake. Like he had a deal with Jake, and Jake broke that bond, and they have a covenant as fellow soldiers, fellow Marines.
On where the perspective is, Jake betrayed him. Jake was the traitor. In that sense, but yeah, I don't know. That doesn't make sense to me. Like maybe okay, Quaritch is gonna go chase him, but then the rest of this military effort is gonna attack the original tribe, and then they kind of all meet back there. That's kind of what I was thinking was gonna happen.
I think this is
maybe they were just like, we lost so bad last time, we're not doing that again.
So let's just launch back into backseat directing. Does that work for you?
I like it.
So this would be backseat directing is where we talk about, if we were sitting in the director's chair, things we would keep and things we would change to keep the film great and maybe make it better. I would
get a little more comfortable of a chair. If I was in the director's seat, especially if I was in the director of Avatar, have a little bit more money to spare.
Yeah. No, but so what we were just talking about, what I would change to make it make sense, to make Quaritch have motivation to chase the Sully family across the world of Pandora. What I would change is I would have some reason where they became aware of Kiri being connected to Awa, and realizing that she could control the nature, potentially control plant life and animal species, and a way for them to, want to research, study her, and harness that control of the planet, because that would be a reason to chase them. And you have the subplot of Quaritch's revenge with the backing of the military, the reasoning to spend all this money sending all this equipment after the family. So we need to get Kiri, we need to study her, we need to know how to control Pandora, because if we can control Pandora, we can use her resources to its fullest extent. That would have made sense to me.
Maybe that's going to happen though. But there's 3 more movies.
But that motivation was needed in this movie to explain why they did all this. I think they're building towards a lot. I think maybe that is something that kind of got lost in the sauce, was like, wait, why are they allowed to go on this mission for one person who's no longer the leader of the people? I get that they would want him dead, but it just seems like a lot of effort for people the people on Avatar are like military and business. They're about getting a job done.
Yeah.
You know, they didn't fly across the stars for a vendetta.
It's all about money.
It is all about money.
Yeah.
That's the whole message all the way through. But I think that was a very good critique on your end. Do you have another one? Because I have some more to go through.
Let me hear some of yours, and maybe it'll spark another one for mine. But I think that's mostly it in terms of like the actual story. I think at some parts of the movie, this is maybe more of a nitpick, like personally, like at certain parts, they would stick with one character or two characters for a really long time. And then like they would shift to another character. And I feel like I wanted to see more of like Jake and Neytiri a little bit more, because it kind of seemed like they weren't in this film that much.
Yeah, that ties in perfectly with my next thing I would change.
It felt like, yeah, it's a sequel. It's building upon the first one, but it didn't fully feel like it was building upon the first one. You know, it felt like it was once again an origin for half or more of the movie.
Yeah.
Which is an hour and a half, so it's literally a full movie worth of it being new.
I'm happy with it feeling like an origin because it's been 13 years since the last one came out. I think they needed to revitalize it, and I think that was necessary to capture the feeling I mentioned at the beginning, which is where I'm kind of torn, because like I said, a thing I would keep with the movie is certainly going with the route of following the kids, the new setting, gives a new feel to the movie, and it lets you capture that magic all over anew. But like you said, I specifically wanted more of Neytiri, because I feel like there was less Jake and Neytiri, but I feel like it was way more cut down on Neytiri's role. Zoe Saldana, so phenomenal in both of these movies. I felt like she was very sidelined in this movie. And like, even when they leave the Omaticaya, they fill Jake's role, which is the military leader, or like overall leader, I guess you could say. But the spiritual leader is just as important to the people of the Na'vi, and they don't show that role being filled, because Neytiri was, well, I guess her mother may still be in that role of the spiritual leader, but who's going to fill those shoes for her mother? Because it was meant to be Neytiri stepping into that role. There's just a lot of
questions that come from them leaving their tribe.
It seems like something that Neytiri would never ever do, but
it seems like it was for the sole purpose of changing the environment to try to stay on par with showing us something new and cool.
I think they should
with the wow factor of the first film.
I think they should have taken all of the Omaticaya people. That's what I think would have made more believable, because their home is in their people.
That's what I thought was going to happen. Was like, okay, they're going to come here, they're going to attack. We don't stand a chance right now, which maybe they would have stand a chance. They beat them in that same spot before, you know. But like, I thought like, oh, maybe they'll go to like a little sub place, set up camp, you know, develop a plan and whatever, you know, draw them in, set up a trap, draw them in, because they're still after that rock. Hopefully they would be, you know, like it's a valuable resource, you know, set up a trap and then boom. So I feel like the whole like shift into a different tribe wasn't necessary. I don't know. I
kind of feel like the shift was necessary for the movie,
right?
But for the plot,
not the story.
Yeah, is two totally different things.
Like if it came out 5-6 years ago, you know, like, and people were maybe more fresh on Avatar and stuff, like, would they have need to shift scenery so drastically?
I thought it was going to be more of a beach community, the way of the water, and less of an island community. And that wouldn't necessarily be as far removed from the Omaticaya. So I didn't necessarily expect that drastic of a shift. But I think it worked really well in more ways than it didn't work. It all goes into that feeling. It's just an indescribable feeling of these new, when they first go underwater, and it's just a million species of fish you'd never seen before on an alien planet. You know, to capture that feeling of the first Avatar, I think they kind of had to go that route, even if they sacrificed some things making perfect sense in the plot.
Which they might circle around and catch us up to speed. You know? I mean, it seems like they have a plan. Watching a few interviews and stuff, part of the reason why it took so long to make this second film is that they decided they weren't just going to make a sequel, that they were going to make 4. You know, and James Cameron's like, writing 4 scripts takes a long time. And then it sounds like they did a ton of research into like marine life and going in the ocean and all this stuff to like develop all this world that we see.
I think when we watch all 5 movies, it's going to feel like 5 episodes.
Yeah.
Like I think it's gonna, because they wrote 4 scripts back to back, I think it's gonna feel very connected.
Right.
And I expect that they just laid a bunch of seeds for us in this first movie.
Which I really appreciate that approach of like, we're gonna go all in or we're not gonna do it at all.
Yeah.
I think that's one of his lines that he's been saying. You know, like, we're gonna spend a bunch of money, we're gonna take our time, we're not in a rush at all, you know, like we're here to make the best story possible, the best experience possible, and we're not gonna cut any corners, is what it sounds like's going on, you know, and it's kind of like the opposite of what Phase 4 was for Marvel. You know, like that was more of like quantity. We're gonna do a bunch of stuff all the time, and you're gonna be so excited all the time. And then this, it felt like it was quality first.
Yes. Yeah. James Cameron, first and foremost, I think as a director, wants you to feel like you are in the world he's creating, whether it be Titanic or it's The Abyss or it's Avatar. And that goes all in with the 3D filmmaking, making you feel like you're in the world building, the plot. He says at one point, I saw an interview where people were saying all the flying scenes in Avatar was unnecessary. I think it was it was producers, right? And he said, "Yep, you're doing your job as a big Hollywood producer.
You're checking all the boxes.
You're checking all the boxes, but I want to see it. And if I want to see it, I think that means people want to see it." And he said, "Yes, it may be purposeless, but in actuality, it has the purpose of making you feel like you're in the world, of making you enjoy the movie and be caught up in the movie." Yeah. So like sometimes because it looks cool is a good enough reason. Yeah. It looks great and it makes you feel like you're in their world. And I think that's the most important thing to him, is that we are in the world that he created. That goes into how they make the movie, because they made the movie, it's groundbreaking special effects, but they're spending millions of dollars to combine the special effects with real world effects. Like for this movie, they filmed Avatar 2, Way of the Water, with a ton of actual footage underwater. This is 900,000 gallons of water on set.
And these actors were like 30 feet underwater. Like it's not like they're just in a little pool, you know, and like the water's right above their head. Like they're down there.
Yeah, Kate Winslet famously broke Tom Cruise's record for filming Holding Her Breath Underwater, which he set, I think, in Rogue Nation, Mission Impossible. Yeah. And I think she held her breath for like 7 minutes.
Insane.
Yeah.
Like, we could probably, if I held my breath right now, it would just be like you talking and then, you know, like
30 seconds?
Yeah, right. There would be no disruption in the podcast at all for me holding my breath.
That's because I talk so long. Because I would talk for 7 minutes.
No, I can't hold my breath for 7 minutes. That's what I'm saying.
But yeah, the world building, it comes from, like you said, that quality first approach. And that quality starts at the people who made this movie. Like the sets are so incredible. In the first movie, the one underwater scene they filmed with strings and ropes and pulleys. They manufactured the actor being underwater, the stunt double being underwater, and they feigned the motions. And yeah, it looked great in the first Avatar, but I don't think they could sustain that for a 3-hour movie. So they went realistic, and they filmed a bunch of these shots underwater with 3D cameras, like so incredible. They used beam splitter technology to make the 3D cameras work aptly underwater, and they had all these challenges like bubbles forming on the lenses that they had to approach. And they met all these challenges partly because James Cameron, one, is a genius filmmaker, and two, his fascination with water has led him to working with water-based projects for years and years. Like a movie like The Abyss, they used these giant silos that they filled with water. That I said Avatar Way of the Water had 900,000 gallons of water on set. Abyss had 11 million gallons of water. Like the challenges that he's faced in his career has set him up to make this movie perfectly, because he already knew they would encounter issues like light reflecting off the water's surface. When you use water that you brought in, it's crystal clear, light reflects off it, which reflecting light is a problem for filmmaking, for a camera. So they cover the surface of the water with these opaque kind of marbles, and it's just stuff that he's encountered before that if somebody didn't have his veteran experience, it wouldn't work on a $200-300 million project. They needed this veteran at the helm to make this movie work, and he pulled it together beautifully. Like behind the scenes, the science of the 3D technology is incredible. I don't even fully understand it to talk about it, but they use this Sony camera specially designed for James Cameron's films, and they have to use specially designed camera because 3D captures using two cameras, the way that our eyes work, to give a depth, which means that there has to be convergence and divergence of the cameras. And when something gets close to a 3D camera, it looks gigantic because they're converged. And when something gets far away, it almost looks like a miniature because they're diverged. So they have to have specially designed cameras for unique situations, and then filming underwater. Could you imagine somebody saying, "Hey, can you make this movie?" All these factors in play.
Yeah, it's wild.
It's unbelievable.
It seems like he has full control, which is really cool, right? Like,
unlike a lot of other projects.
Right. That's where a lot of projects, I think, kind of develop hiccups, is where they don't agree on things. Like the production studio wants it done one way, the director wants it done another. Maybe the actor wants it done another way.
If you're Dwayne Johnson.
So it seems like they trust him since they brought in so much money with this guy. They're like, all right, we'll trust you. I'm sure he has to talk them through some things, but I think that's good because it's his world that he's created, and it'd be a shame if someone came in and tried to tell them how to run his world,
Yeah, I mean, James Cameron's incredible, and I could go on and on about him and the technology even that they just created for these movies, but
there's so much to go over with this. We haven't even touched on the whole plot yet.
To go over the 3-hour plot step by step would take over a whole separate episode. So,
and we literally just watched it, so it's fresh in our minds. So we're super excited.
Yeah, we're bubbling over with thoughts. Yeah. You had a question when we watched it about Neteam that I wanted to address.
Yeah. So there's 3 kids that are Jake's kids, and the way that they tell he's a hybrid or whatever is because Jake has 4 fingers like we do, and then a thumb, and then the natives have 3 fingers and a thumb, and Jake's firstborn has 3 fingers, and then the other 2 have 4. Why? Well, why did it skip the first child?
So I've been thinking about this since you asked that question, and I think I have a theory, which is basically that our physical traits as humans, we have allele groups, right? So you have our genetic code, and then you basically have the your genotype and phenotype, mm-hmm. and your physical characteristics. So your phenotype has traits that are dominant or recessive, and I kind of think that it could be explained the same way for them if maybe having 4 fingers, which is what Jake has, is a dominant trait. Then there's maybe viewed as a 75% chance that his kids have 4 fingers, but a 25% chance that they would have their mother Neytiri's trait of 3 fingers, and their firstborn just by chance happens to be born with 3 fingers, while the other 2 children that are directly blood related to them are born with 4.
Yeah, could be, I guess.
It's not ever talked about in the film, which I didn't notice that Neteim only had 3 fingers, but after you said it, I
kept wondering why are they only picking on the second one? Why aren't they picking on the oldest brother?
Well, they have it.
And then I was trying to look at his hand, and I saw that he only had 3 fingers, and I was like, well, that's not the same.
They show if you disagree with us, they show a shot in the movie twice where he's a baby and his hand is reaching out, and you can see clearly Neteim has 3 fingers and a thumb.
Yeah, even when he's an adult, you can see it at some points.
Yeah, I think that it's really clear when he's a kid, though. So I think that is basically the difference is chance, genetic chance. And I think they might have kind of wrote it that way because Took was maybe not as involved or too young to be picked on by these kids of this age group, and then the writers wanted this plot line of Loak feeling kind of like the outcast that the Tulkun feels like as well. So he feels like kinship because he's an outcast, because his dad looks at him as kind of the screw up, and he feels like an alien to these other people in a way that his brother can't relate to because his brother's the golden child. So I think they created that. It's kind of a subtle way to create it in the writing, is something as simple as an additional finger. But it's the difference between being an alien and being accepted.
Right. Yeah. Another thing I want to talk about is just like the physics and world design and all that stuff that they, like, all the thought that went into designing all these animals, all these ships, all the, like it's very elaborate. Like just the subtle detail of not even like how the special effects are done, but just like the details of having this stuff in. Like the first time Jake rode his sea creature, he put a strap on his hand, kind of like a weightlifter would on a bar or something, which I can relate to. And he put it on his hand because he knew that it was going to be really fast and he's got to have like this extra grip, and he's not used to having to grip so hard by just flying in the air, because the water is a lot more resistance. And he still ended up letting go because of how strong the force of the water was. Like that's a small little detail that like they didn't have to add in, like just that little thought. Or
you feel the presence, I think, of his military experience in small details.
Yeah.
Like that's something of him like hunkering himself down to that. I think that concept of that could be related back to his military experience. And also when Neytiri says this is a family, not a squadron, you see those details a lot as well. The way he talks to his family and his kids, especially in moments of crisis, his kids call him sir. He's the chief of their village also, which is also a military role. So it's I think always felt throughout, which is another part of good world building.
Yeah. And the way the mechanics worked on those like exoskeleton machines in the beginning, we didn't get to see them a lot, but that colonel, the new colonel or whatever her name is, she was walking around and it looked so smooth because that stuff doesn't make sense, right? Like how could she be moving around? There's no resistance. There's no, like, she's not pushing off of anything. Like, how is it working? But they made it look so believable.
There's a part in the first Avatar film where Quaritch gets into a giant mech, and I was thinking while I was watching it, man, these look like some 2009 special effects. And when you watch them moving in the new exoskeletons, incredibly smooth, like you said. It looks phenomenal.
Yeah, and like just when they took a step, like there's little pieces that are attached to their foot that's attached to a pivot point, and those are moving within the giant part of it.
I imagine that's applying some form of like graded variable resistance, which is how they can gauge a step.
Right. Yeah, so like just little stuff like that, or like the aquatic characters that they were like getting on to ride, most of them had like the 4 fins, but so they can like swim by flapping their fins up and down, but then when they're like going fast and stuff or going straight, they like could put their fins back and become more aerodynamic and swim more like a whale, where they're kind of like going up and down and they like fit seamlessly together. It's like, it's crazy how much detail they put into like these animals, because animals in real life have that crazy amount of detail.
Have all their own details. And we talked about before the level of detail that went into Pirates of the Caribbean, the tentacles on Davy Jones. And it's like a special effect element that if you put thought into it, seems like a real element. And that's injected into the whole world of Pandora. I feel like that level of care and that thought process. Another animal I thought of when you were talking was, I don't know if I'd call them like a little frog, but the ones that produce that like umbrella halo and they rotate down. You notice that they showed them in the daytime in this movie and they are not bioluminescent, which makes sense because bioluminescence by nature would only occur at night. So they've now shown them in the day and in the night. And it's just like that thought process of like, what would this creature look like in the day?
Right.
It would look different at night because it evolved this way. And that thought process is what makes the world and animals feel so real.
Or even the subtle difference of the forest people and the aquatic people. Because
their fins on their arms, their tails are different.
Their tails are stronger.
They're a lighter, even skin tone from being underwater, most likely so often.
That was like the first thing I noticed is like, wow, they're more of an aqua.
Yeah.
Like to blend in with the water better. Like that's super cool. And then the tail that the forest people have is like strictly used for balance. Like I guess a monkey or a cat, like a wild cat,
which makes so much sense with them being the forest people running between the trees,
right?
Versus the reef people swimming in the water. They have fins and a tail. Like
it's like that's those small little things that like maybe you wouldn't have thought of right away, just because we're used to kind of seeing those adaptations in real life. It's just so cool that added all those into the different environments and different creatures that are living in these environments and stuff, or even how elaborate the process was of catching that whale thing, where they're like, yeah, we got to separate them with this sonic sound wave thing, and then once we got them separated, we put these balloons on each of the fins so it keeps them at the surface, and then once they get tired, we shoot them in the belly, blah blah blah. Like, that's a very elaborate process, which could have just simply have been like, yeah, we have this big bazooka and we shoot them in the back.
Harpoon them.
That's the end of that story. You know, like, that whole sequence was like 20 minutes long of them just catching that first whale. Like, we didn't have to spend that much time on it. But the fact that we did, we see that process and stuff, and it's cool.
It's like you said about Chris Nolan off camera. Chris Nolan creates a world, creates the rules, tells you the rules, and then follows them. And that's what makes a world feel real, because James Cameron is giving himself these rules. He's saying, I'm creating this creature, but I'm not just going to make it look cool. This creature, it swims close to the bottom of the ocean, so maybe it would have a hard shell on the surface, on its top side, and then it would have evolved the softer side on its bottom, which is generally safe. And then it follows these rules. When you encounter the creature later, they fire the harpoon at the head of the tulkun, and it knocks it off its head. It uses its own head as a shield, because we know also that they're intelligent. Like, it's just so brilliant that the rules are, here's the world. It's not, I created this creature to look cool and look how beautiful it is. Yes, it is beautiful, but it's, if I create this creature, it lives here, what would it look like? What would it do if it truly spent every day living in these conditions and then following those rules to the letter? I love how intelligent, how they give this brain system to the tulkun. Like, it's such an interesting creature that it works for it to be such a focus of the plot. Mm-hmm. You know, it wasn't force fed to us into the plot because they wanted something to happen later down the line. It was given a purpose and they breathed life into it.
Yeah. And like, I think some people could maybe complain that this movie is a little bit long and a little bit slow at points. But those slow parts seem necessary. You know, like they're telling a story about a certain aspect of this world that we're experiencing. You know, and like that whale scene, you know, that was really long. It didn't have to be, you know, but it gave us a lot of context for later.
I didn't think during that whole sequence at any point this is long, which I've gotten to a point.
I think some of the other, that was more of like an action part.
Yeah.
But like some of the other parts where they're like just talking or like swimming through the water for like 15 minutes, and not saying any words, you know, like that kind of stuff drags out a little bit. But he has like intention behind it.
There are moments where I found myself thinking it was long, or wondering how much time, not wondering in a bad way, but wondering what point are we at in the movie, which I think is partly something I've just started to do with every movie that I watch. It's just thinking about, okay, what act of the movie are we in? Where's the climax?
Yeah.
But
the curse of having a podcast.
but I did think about it in this movie more than once, which I don't take as a huge critique. I did think about, oh, well, it's been a good while, or maybe this part feels a little bit slow, but I'd say overall I felt enthralled like throughout the movie. I was very captivated.
Yeah, I agree. Would you go and watch it in theaters again?
Potentially. If I went again, I'd probably want to go and see it in 3D.
Okay. Yeah.
Would you see it again?
On Disney Plus.
My fiance hasn't seen the movie yet, so I was thinking towards the end of the movie, I could see this again.
Yeah.
I could see this again with her if she wanted to see it.
Yeah, like I'd be down to go see it again. I just don't want to spend the money.
Well, that theater we went to, it's only $10 for a 3D ticket, which is nice.
For matinee.
Yeah, true. I like to go matinee.
We went at 9:45 in the morning.
I don't want to be tired during a 3-hour movie, so I would probably go for a matinee.
Yeah. We should do that more often.
This theater was empty, which is a nice.
Yeah, it was. I liked it. Now it's like we still have the rest of our day.
I don't know about you, but when you go to see a movie like Endgame or something, like, do you enjoy the theater? I always enjoy the theater experience, but I don't want to hear people reacting out loud to the movie, and that's kind of what happens when you go to see a big movie.
We want to be the ones reacting out loud. I want to be able to hear Andrew speaking to me at these different points of the movie.
But like when you watch Infinity War, at a certain point after like the 5th person gets dusted, you get tired of people being like, oh no. It's like, okay.
I don't know, the theater experience was fun for those movies for me. I don't think it was Okay, so
Still fun.
worst movie theater experience. Mine is probably Guardians of the Galaxy, the first one. This lady behind, it was my mom and I went, and this lady behind us was just talking the entire time. And like, not even about the movie. Like, she was so far behind, you know, like, and then I think she was either sneezing the whole movie or burping. I can't remember which one.
I don't know which is worse. It's got to be burping.
But like, my mom and I were just looking at each other like, oh my gosh, is she going to talk this whole time? So that part is good to avoid.
So mine could either be...
But like when everyone laughs or cheers when the Hulk smashed Thor, you know, in the first Avengers, like, that was really cool to be a part of. Or like when everyone's clapping and stuff.
No, not the clapping.
You don't like that?
I don't want 10 seconds of clapping. I'm trying to catch the next bit of dialogue here. I could do with the cheering or laughing, but like the clapping is not for me.
Oh my gosh.
My worst theater experience would either be Aquaman 1, where I was so tired that I fell asleep, struggling to stay awake. It was late, but I also didn't love the movie. Or when I saw Spider-Man No Way Home, so frustrating. There was... this wasn't the most frustrating part, but there was a parent who had brought a child who was too young to sit through a movie, and she kept crying, and he was walking her up and down the aisle to take her out into the lobby to calm down, bringing her back. She'd cry again, but the people sitting directly behind us were...
we saw that together.
The people sitting directly behind us were complaining about her the whole time, and it was like, she's less frustrating than you. Stop talking about her. She's a kid. She has an excuse.
That's funny. See, I couldn't hear them talking. I could hear the baby crying the whole time, but I couldn't hear them talking because I was on the other side of the aisle than you.
I was just really excited for that movie, so that amplified it. But
right.
I mean,
so like they were talking like so quiet, but that's like all you could hear. I'm surprised you didn't say anything. You're normally the kind of person to speak your mind, and
I didn't want to get thrown out of the theater and not be able to watch my movie. I don't want things to esceld. But I kept grabbing Sierra and was
punched in the face.
I was grabbing Sierra. I said, I'm gonna talk to them. I'm gonna say something. I'm gonna say something to them, and I held myself back.
All right, I think this is a good place to kind of wrap up this episode. We're already over an hour long. We could probably keep talking about it
easily.
There's a lot of stuff that goes into this movie, and we're like excited. We just saw it, you know, so we're just kind of word vomiting everything that's in our head.
We didn't even get to touch on the motion capture technology for the movie, but we'll have more chance if we want to talk about the movie later. And comment and let us know if you have other thoughts or things that we missed. Yeah,
I'm interested to see if our audience thinks that this movie was better than the first one.
Maybe I have recency bias. I did watch both of them recently, but I think it was.
Yeah. I think it's right now. I think they're equal.
I would put Avatar 2 on top.
Yeah. All right. Let us know in the comments down below. Again, we post every Monday and Thursday. We post on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, everywhere else that you can get your podcasts. We appreciate you listening. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Sorry.
You didn't give me a chance to say goodbye.
I didn't know that you had anything else to say. We were already wrapping up.
Again, thank you so much for listening. Again, we asked earlier, if you have the time to go ahead and go to our Spotify. You're looking at me like that.
Because you're talking. I'm just giving you my respect by watching you.
Thank you. You got a look in your eye. Please go to our Spotify, rate and follow us. It would mean so much. Overall, we really enjoyed this theater experience, and we hope to keep making new episodes and content like this for you guys. Super excited. And
that's a wrap.